Welcome back to Did You Know, a local heritage podcast brought to you in association with CHOM FM Pickering College Radio and the History Hound. My name is Richard McLeod and I'm your host for this episode of the History Hound Presents. In this series, we've been looking back at local history and the events that shaped our history. This weekend, we have an interesting topic to look at, probably one of the most contentious events in our history, that being the history of the Ghost Canal. Sir William Muloch's dream of building a canal from Newmarket north to Lake Simcoe to connect with the Trent water system. So this week, we're going to take a look at the event. We're going to take a look at some of the exciting aspects of the event and perhaps get a little closer to clarifying some of the aspects of the event that perhaps were glossed over in the past. One of the great things about history, one of the things that I enjoy about history, is that we have the ability with modern technology, with the opening of old documents and text, and with the advances that we have made in evidence gathering to reassess things from the past and perhaps debunk some of the things that aren't true. Perhaps discover new facts that weren't considered back when the event happened. And that's kind of, I think, exciting. That's certainly the case with this week's topic, the Ghost Canal, or many call it Muloch's Ghost Canal. So let's get started. The idea of building a canal essentially from Lake Ontario north to Lake Simcoe to connect to the rest of the Great Lakes was a dream that was put forward very early in our history. If we go back to Champlain and his visit of the area, it's recorded from the time that Champlain floated the idea of whether we could use the existing water system to travel from Toronto to Lake Simcoe into Georgian Bay and into the Great Lakes, saving a lot of time in accessing the rest of the country. So it isn't really a new idea. This plan was to manifest itself in the late 1800s with the building of the Trent Canal system, which was to encompass the Newmarket to Lake Simcoe Canal project as part of the system. If we look back at the whole process, it was wrought with controversy, perhaps was wrought with political interference. The story that came out of the whole fiasco, if you want to call it, is an interesting event to look back on, because many people believe that it was perhaps the only mistake that William Muloch ever made in his political career, a long political career. And so just from that point of view, as a young man, I became interested in what went wrong. And today we're going to talk a little bit about that. So I think to start with, we should talk a little bit about Sir William Muloch. Sir William Muloch was the father of the stamp and the mail system here in Canada. Under his regime, we got nationwide telephone system. So he's often seen as the father of Canadian telephone system. He also, under his regime, focused our attention on building a railroad from sea to sea, as they like to say. So he had a history of doing incredible things. One of the projects that he took on was the building of the canal from Newmarket north to Lake Simcoe to connect to the Trent Canal system. And many people say that that was perhaps his only failure in his entire political career. So I think it'd be interesting to see whether it really was a failure or whether it was doomed right from the beginning for political reasons. So we'll take a look at that. So one of the difficulties that our forefathers had back then was that to ship goods via the railroad was becoming increasingly expensive. And of course, the railroad was a monopoly. So local interests, the merchants, the politicians, were all seeking another way to perhaps find some way to ship their goods and services throughout Canada. And the ideal situation was to find a waterway and a water system that would allow them to send the goods from Newmarket area north to Lake Simcoe to connect to the Trent water system and to the Great Lakes, and therefore be able to distribute their goods across the country. One of the prime examples of a local company that really needed to find a new way to ship was the William Kane and Sons woolen factory. They made wooden utensils, they made pencils, they made buckets, anything of wood. And they had two problems. First of all, they needed to bring in wood from the north, from the area that still had forest. We had pretty much cut down all of the wood in our area by the late 1800s. And so they needed to be able to bring in wood for their factory. And they also needed to have a way to get the finished product out of Newmarket to the world. Another example, of course, of that would be the Davis Leather Tannery. Again, was a worldwide supplier of shoes and leather products, and they needed a good way to transport their goods to the world at large. So there was a real, I guess you would say, urgent need to find some sort of solution to the increasing railway costs. And that solution was to build a canal. And as I say, throughout our earlier history, it was always felt that there was a real potential to build a canal going to the north. So one of the first things that the local merchants and local politicians did was to get together to discuss this and to go to Ottawa to lobby the government to consider building this canal. If we take a look at the shipping cost, or the increase in shipping costs of materials on the Grand Trunk Railroad, which is the railroad that served Newmarket, the cost had increased by 1904 by 30 to 50%. Again, essentially because it had a monopoly. So that same year, in September of 1904, a meeting was held at the Old Town Hall on Botsford Street. Attending the meeting was the local politicians and the local merchants. And I say local, what I'm really including is Newmarket, Aurora, Hall Landing, Bradford. All of them got together and they decided that they would head off to Ottawa. One of the people who attended the meeting was Sir William Mulock, who was our member of Parliament, federal Parliament here in Newmarket, and he encouraged them to put together a delegation and to head off to Ottawa. A lot of people felt that Mulock's involvement in the project was a bit of a conflict of interest, because he was in a position to help steer this proposal within the federal government. The Liberal government was in fact in power, and he was a powerful man within the federal government, and so a lot of people initially thought that he would be an ideal person to steer the project forward and to get certification for the project to start. And we'll refer to that later on in the presentation. As I say, one of the reasons that was given by the Conservative government, who won an election before the canal project could be finished, pointed out that they would not support any project which had Sir William Mulock as its head. So we'll go back and take a look at that in a little while. So on September 30th of 1904, after they had sent a delegation to Ottawa, the federal government decided that it would do a preliminary survey to see whether the building of the canal from Newmarket to Lake Simcoe to hook up to the Trent Valley canal system, which existed, was feasible. And on October 7th of 1904, a government engineer arrived here in Newmarket and visited the Newmarket and area, so Bradford, Hall Landing, Aurora, to begin to do their feasibility study. On February 2nd of 1905, a meeting was held by Newmarket Council to arrange a proposal to submit to the government, detailing just exactly how this canal could be accomplished, just exactly what it meant to the area, merchants, and also politicians. What was important about this is that they were able to put together a unified force of all of the area councils and merchants. So this project had overwhelming support locally. Now, it's not surprising, because along with the politicians and the merchants, this project also appealed to the local population. At that time, people were looking for work, and this was going to be a huge project which was going to put money, quite frankly, into the pockets of the local politician, through labor, through goods and services. So it was well supported. On February 21st of 1905, a second delegation was sent to Ottawa, being made up of 65 men, to present their petition. The delegation met with the Prime Minister, who at that time was Sir Wilfrid Laurier, and Sir William Mulock, who at that time was the Postmaster General of the federal government. And one of the people who, local dignitaries who also went with the delegation to Ottawa to support the petition, was E.J. Davis, who at the time was Minister of Crown Lands. So a number of the ministers of the government received the petition. If we take a look at the makeup of the delegation was made up of, as I say, local business people, really the movers and shakers economically of the area. Now, one of the contentious issues, I suppose, was that as the years went by, and certainly after the election of the Conservative government, their argument was that the only reason why the petition was accepted and work began on the canal was because Sir William Mulock had pulled strings, and that the project had never been properly I guess you would say, surveyed, had never been properly studied, and that it was a foolish, foolish proposition. As we continue with this presentation, we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll speak to that suggestion, and we'll take a look, in my opinion, the fact that it wasn't justified. The first myth, I suppose, that we need to dispel is that the scheme was a case of cronyism by Sir William Mulock and our town fathers. I would point out that the report that Ottawa received back from the engineers was not only in favor of proceeding with the venture, but it outlined in great detail why the project had every chance of success. One of the interesting things that we are able to now look at, but at that time I guess was not open to public scrutiny, was a report done, as I say, by the engineers, in which they said that they thought that the building of the canal from Newmarket to Lake Simcoe was a better proposition than had been the Trent Canal, which had had a number of problems and was very slow to materialize. So, at the time, it was well studied, and the educated opinion was that it was a no-brainer, that there would be absolutely no problem in building this canal. So, the myth that it was a silly idea right from the beginning and that everybody agreed with that is not true. If you have a chance to look at the map of the Trent Canal system, you'll notice that the engineers who built the project had a problem finding sources of water supply in order to make the project work. And you'll notice from a map that it actually snakes all over the place as the engineers looked for a water source so that they could actually build the canal. And for those of you who have ever traveled on the Trent Canal, perhaps you've taken a cruise or you have your own boat, you will probably have noticed that it snakes all over eastern Ontario on its way to Lake Simcoe. That's probably a point that I should point out to you. The Trent Canal system starts in Kingston, but it eventually terminates in Cooks Bay in Lake Simcoe. And so there was a automatic connection from that to the proposed canal, which was going to run south from Lake Simcoe down to Newmarket. In July of 1905, the House of Commons voted $100,000 to get started on the work on the canal. One could argue that with the existing studies that had been done, that Parliament was convinced that this was a doable project. Otherwise, I don't think they would have given them $100,000. The program's specifications were published, and during the period, a one-year period from 1905 to 1906, we had visitors to Newmarket and area. The people who were looking at how they were going to accomplish this, they were out in the community looking for potential suppliers of goods and services, and looking at where they were going to hire local workmen to work on this project. In May of 1906, the contracts were awarded for the dredging of the Holland River from Cooks Bay to Hall Landing, and an application was made to build a bridge at the lower landing, which is at the Queensville side road. And that particular contract was awarded to a local company. In October of 1906, the dredging operations commenced. They were delayed a little bit by the slow shipment of machinery going to the area. The difficulty in initially with the dredging was a little bit of a setback, but certainly for those people who know about construction, these kinds of setbacks quite often happen, and really I don't think was seen as a reason for concern. This brings us to the second myth that most people still believe about the project, which was that the project was plagued by mismanagement. But as we proceed, we'll see that there were some setbacks. But for those who have ever handled a large project, things do crop up, and they were very quickly resolved. This was certainly the case with this project. Welcome back to Did You Know? And today's topic is the Ghost Canal, which became a local pivot point in our history, and one of those interesting events that we're able to go back using today's know-how and today's research abilities to pinpoint what exactly happened when they were building this canal, and perhaps put a few myths to bed. So in our last segment, we were talking about the fact that in October of 1906, dredging operations began on the Holland River, and they had a little bit of problems in the beginning because they had difficulties in getting the equipment on site, but that didn't last very long, and they were able to get started. In May of 1907, the dredging at the mouth of the Holland River resumed after a short winter break. On June 14th of 1907, dispatch was issued from the Department of Railways and Canals in Ottawa, announcing that the contracts had been awarded for the construction of the canal locks from Newmarket to Hall Landing. So, as you can see, one of the things that becomes very clear is that they were doing this project essentially in two parts. They were doing dredging and the creation of the canal from Hall Landing north to Lake Simcoe, and the second section was from Newmarket, basically at Davis Drive, north to Hall Landing. So it was being done in two parts. Obviously, in any project that is done, preference is given to local interests and local labor to conduct a project, and that was certainly the case here. This project was a boon for Newmarket and area at the time. What is interesting when we take a look at the contracts that were signed and the economics of the project, that companies were awarded contracts based on their record of previous successes in completing this type of work. And a great deal of effort was put into finding companies that had the necessary expertise to complete the project. There's certainly no doubt that local companies were given preference in the bidding process, but if they were deemed to be solid candidates, all things considered, I really don't have a problem with that. That is a standard business procedure to attempt to find local companies that can provide the necessary infrastructure for a project. It's interesting to note that in July of 1907, The Trent Canal from Lake Simcoe to Lake Ontario was officially opened. And what this essentially did was it refocused all of the attention of the public right across Canada, actually, to the Lake Simcoe to Newmarket portion of the Trent waterway. Now, it's also interesting to notice that at this point, they always referred to essentially the Newmarket to Lake Simcoe Canal as part of or an extension of the Trent Waterways project. So this wasn't a separate project in the government's eyes or in the Canadian populace eyes. This was one and the same project. In October of 1907, they did encounter problems with the dredgings of the Holland River. What they discovered was that there was some difficulty with extremely difficult clay deposits, which were located just a few feet below the surface of the river, and there was a delay. Well, they went out and found a contractor who had the ability to dredge that area, so they had to go out and find additional expertise. This did stop the work for a little while they did that, but they were able to do that, and the whole dredging process began again on February 12th of 1908 with additional excavation companies brought online to handle the difficulties that they had encountered with the clay deposits. Now, it is true that there was a 3-month delay in the process. So basically from October of 1907 to February of 1908. But they did realize what the problem was. They went out and found the necessary expertise to solve the problem. So most people will tell you that this is fairly standard procedure when an engineering problem is encountered. You cease operations, and as quickly as possible, you find expertise out there to solve that problem. In May 1st of 1908, work commenced on the arrival of 60 teams of horses, which soon grew out to over 300 teams of horses, and over 400 men were housed in 3 camps within the Newmarket area. So basically, in May of 1908, the project had moved to an advanced level. 60 teams, they say, of horses, which was to increase to 300 teams of horses, arrived to work on the project. This was a huge boom for area farmers because this work was in addition to the work that they were doing on their farms. It brought in additional employment. It allowed them to use their horses when they were not being used in the fields for the growing of crops. And as well, with the 400 men arriving in the area in essentially 3 camps, this brought in additional people to the area, which obviously meant additional revenue for local merchants, bringing money in to the area, which again provided a boom for the area. There was an employment office established on the southwest corner of Main and Ontario Streets for the administration of the project. So there was a management office here in Newmarket, and of course that provided local labor as well. Preliminary excavation of the turning basin on what was then Huron Street, now Davis Drive, began. And it was It was to link up with Lock 3, which was to be located at Green Lane. Now, I should probably clarify that if today you go down to the Davis Tannery, located on Davis Drive, just east of the railway tracks, you will see a huge parking lot beside the tannery. That parking lot used to be the canal. That turning basin was actually completed and was filled up with water. And it's fairly recent that that canal was or that turning basin was filled in, and the after the project was shut down. But that is where the turning basin was located. This is where the terminus of the canal was expected to be. It's no coincidence that it was located where it was. It was beside the Davis Tannery, one of the companies that was going to be a major user of this canal, and it is just a little bit to the west of the Kane woodware factory, another business that was going to heavily use this canal system. So it was located in a perfect place to service both of those companies. On July the 3rd of 1908, the steam shovels arrived to complete the deep excavation and pile driving necessary to build the canal. So up to this point, I should point out, everything was going fairly smoothly. They had a couple of hiccups, but it was going fairly smoothly. I might point out that nobody on the engineering brigade, nobody who was building this canal had any problems with the way that things were proceeding. They were doing an amazing job. They were completing this project fairly quickly, and they, as I say, they were finding lots of water to fill this canal. For those people who are not aware, there are a series of artesian wells. Actually, they go right through Newmarket, but they followed the Holland River to the north. And so when they would dig out the canal, it would almost immediately fill up with water, which was another myth that was put forward when they canceled the canal, which was that there was no water, that there was no source of water, that water was going to be a problem. One of the headlines in the paper indicated that water doesn't flow uphill, so that there was going to be a canal with no water. That was not the case. And it was probably the first indication, when we see that in the paper, that people were starting to get a little worried about the project. And all of this was coming out of the Conservative government, who were looking for some sort of a, I guess you would say, complaint against the existing Liberal government for mismanagement, for nepotism. But, the documentation and the testimonies from people involved don't seem to substantiate, that complaint. By September 25th of 1908, Lock 3, which I mentioned was located at Green Lane, was completed. It was 150 feet long and 70 feet wide and 25 feet deep. The removed earth was deposited along both sides of the trench where the bank is low, and required building up the sides so that they would have a uniform depth of 8 feet in the water course. It's amazing to think about it, but back then they used 60 span of horses to move all the earth and and put in all of the piping that was necessary to drain the work area. In March of 1909, construction costs began to soar beyond the initial estimate of $300,000, and the project suddenly became even more political. The government was facing an election, and the canal had become an election issue, which I had mentioned before. The expenditure, feasibility, and justification began to be questioned nearly every day within the political arena. By now, Sir William Mulock had been replaced by a gentleman named Mr. Aylesworth as the point man for the project. I believe if we take a look at the newspapers of the time, Sir William Mulock thought that if, in fact, most of the objection to this project was the fact that he was connected with it. He thought that, perhaps if he passed control over to another person, that this would alleviate some of the complaints of the opposition parties. Alas, it wasn't as simple as that. On November 26, 1909, we see the completion of the concrete walls of the turning basin on Huron Street, which, as I said, is now Davis Drive. The trench was now 8 feet deep, extending from the turning basin 3/4 of a mile north to Lock 3. So that section was completed. By November of 1909, Lock 3 is nearly completed, and they fill up that section with water. The record shows that 150 cubic yards of concrete was poured every day using 3 to 4 carloads of gravel daily, and a carload of cement every other day was used. So as you can see, they were making excellent progress. The contractor supplied everything except the cement, which was supplied by the government. The soil from the turning basin was used to build the trestles underneath the Queen Street Bridge for the Metropolitan Railway. A lot of you have probably walked along Queen Street and you've seen the trestle, which rests under the Queen Street Bridge. That was to carry the Metropolitan Railway cars over the Holland River. And, in the future, we'll take a look at the Metropolitan Railway and another interesting story from our history. On September 10th of 1910, Lock 2, which is North Main Street, was completed with a concrete dam, and the lock chambers were almost completed, and excavations were beginning to be made on Lock 1, which was located at Hall Landing. Now, of interest here is that we have another section of the canal that had been completed. Lock 2, many of you have probably seen this if you walk the Taylor walkway from the tannery north. You've probably passed over the lock number 2, which is located there. And perhaps many of you have walked all the way up that area all the way to Hall Landing, and you probably have seen lock number 1, which is located on Old Yonge Street as you enter into Hall Landing. Now, I think at this point we should note that, as I said, progress was being made, and the gap of the unfinished sections were now declining, so they're becoming less and less. So another myth at the time was that progress was slowed or stopped and would probably never happen. So, the Conservative government at that time was arguing that at some point this project was going to go bankrupt. At some point this project was going to stop on its own because of mismanagement. So I want to emphasize that all documents and I would argue evidence that you can still see today prove that that assertion was untrue. But political pressures began to surface yet again. The actual progress on the canal was set aside in, I guess you'd say, in service of political expediency. On December 5th of 1910, the Newmarket Canal was ridiculed by the Conservative government within Parliament. They began to call it Muloch's Folly, a political ploy designed to unseat the government and to paint the project as a total and utter failure. Now, one of the things that is interesting is that were this to happen or unfold today, one of the first things that Parliament would do would be to send people from Ottawa to Newmarket, to wherever the project was taking place, and take a look for themselves. But they didn't do that. So we have to remember that Parliament was discussing a project that they had never seen, that they had no idea whether what was being said in Parliament was true. And unfortunately, it wasn't true. But they did not do their due diligence. There was no truth to the allegations that were being made by the government. If you take a look at the documentation, and if you take a look at the reports of the engineers, you will see that the engineers, in fact, said that it was business as usual. They were encountering no problems, and they anticipated that they would soon be complete with the project. Sadly, on September 21st of 1911, the Conservatives were successful in defeating the Liberal government, and Robert Borden became the Prime Minister of Canada. The loss by the Liberals, I would say, really is what we can attribute the cancellation of the canal project to. The Liberals were defeated primarily on the question of the canal project. Yes, there were other issues. Perhaps people had become tired with the Liberal government, but once the Conservatives took over, I think they felt obliged to follow through on their assertion that the canal had to be cancelled. Contrary to the myths that continue to be published, the project did proceed under a bit of a cloud. In January, as I say, of 1912, local councils passed a resolution to approach the Conservative government and demand that the project be completed. It was nearly completed, so they wanted to make sure that the Conservative government did not pull the plug on the project. On February 14th, a resolution was presented to Parliament, and the government rejected all appeals and cancelled all of the outstanding contracts related to the project. So essentially, upon election, the Conservative government decided that it would cancel the project immediately. They weren't interested in any reports. They weren't interested in any updates as to whether the project was proceeding as planned. They immediately wanted to shut down the project. By August 7th of 1912, all work on the canal stopped, and the administration offices here in Newmarket were closed, and all machinery was removed. Welcome back to Did You Know? So we're at the point where the canal has been, project has been canceled, and the whole project under the arms Welcome back to Did You Know? So in our last segment, we talked about the fact that the project was canceled by the Conservative government upon its election, and they appeared to have no interest in looking at the project and the results of the project themselves. They rejected any appeals by local councils, political entities, business people. They also rejected any report by the engineering company and the company that was building the project. They just simply decided that it had to be canceled immediately. So, if we take a look at documentation which has been unearthed, shall we say, over the years, we get a hint to the government's objectives. And I think we can take a look from the government's statement as published in Hazard for the period where they said that, or they stated that, and this was the Prime Minister that stated this, no project attached to or championed by Sir William Mulock will be allowed by this government to be completed. So that's fairly clear. They didn't go back and say, well, we've taken a look at the project and we don't think that this project is going to work. They very clearly said, we don't want this project to continue because this is a Liberal project. This is a project spearheaded by Sir William Mulock, who we don't particularly like. So they canceled the project. So I think it's probably, since the project has now been canceled, it's probably a good idea to take a look at a few of the facts related to the canal project that you may not realize. The total distance of the canal system from Lake Simcoe to Newmarket is 13 miles. 8.5 miles of the canal from Lake Simcoe to the mouth of the Holland River was completely dredged and straightened. The remaining 4.5 miles from Hall Landing to Newmarket was completely dredged and straightened. We can see that given more time, we would now have a canal. Another myth was that the topographical elevations, so the above sea level situation, would have been a problem. That's what the naysayers had to say. So let's take a look at whether that's true. Lake Simcoe sits at 718 feet. Newmarket sits at 761 feet. Van Dorf at 1,050 feet. And Lake Ontario is at 245 feet. What we notice is that the flow of the potential canal would have been downhill towards Lake Simcoe. So obviously, all these jokes that they were publishing in the paper that Mulock was building a canal which would not allow the flow of water was in fact incorrect. The differences in the levels between Hall Landing and Newmarket was 43 feet, and the rise in elevation required by the locks system were as follows. Lock 1 at Hall Landing was 16 feet. Lock 2 at North Main was 16 feet. And finally, Lock 3 close to Newmarket was 11 feet. So if we take a look at that, we can see that any variation in elevation had been accounted for with these locks, and therefore the project certainly would have been doable. We should also take a look at the main elements of the canal. There were 4 swing bridges located at Lower Landing, which is the Queensville side road, at Lock 1 in Hall Landing, Lock 2 on North Main, and the Green Lane Road overpass. Many of you, if you've bicycled along that way or you've walked up that way, you will still see evidence of these structures. The bridges were all complete along the main area. All the main structures, dams, spillways, and approachments were completed by 1911. The three locks were all similar except for the dam arrangements. So, we see that they were different elevations. Lock gates were not installed at any of the lock's chambers before it was canceled. So basically, what was unleft had not been completed was the installation of the lock's chambers. Otherwise, the project was complete. Sadly, at the time of the abandonment of the project, the canal system was 83% complete. So, didn't have much left to do. Upon cancellation, it was simply cleared of the equipment and abandoned. So they just walked away. Essentially, the government just walked away from the project, wrote off the investment, and forgot about it. Now, I find this absolutely amazing. I don't know whether this could happen today, where the government just simply shut down everything, wrote off the costs that they had invested, and just simply said, okay, we're going to forget about this. It's ironic that the canal project was begun to find a less expensive alternative to the railway transportation. As it turned out, the construction of the canal gave the railway more business than it had before. Delivering huge amounts of material and equipment to the lock sites was one of the things that brought money not only to the Grand Trunk Railroad, but to the Metropolitan Railroad as well. So, the railroads ended up making money on this project, which is, I think, kind of interesting. It must also be acknowledged that the original estimate of costs were about $100,000, but the actual expenditures before it was canceled were $600,000, with another $400,000 required to complete it. However, in walking away from the project, the government essentially wrote off $600,000 of investment. So you just simply struck it off the books and pretended that it never happened. The story does not end there. Over the years, the project became a popular project for graduating engineers and earth science students. I had the good fortune to meet and walk the route in the spring of 2016 with a group of graduate students. During the walk, I learned that the graduating students had been charged with re-examining the plans and schemes that were put in place, and they had come to the conclusion that the canal should have and would have worked. So what we see now with today's facts, today's expertise, is that this canal would have worked, should have worked, and was canceled prematurely. One of the myths that that we can put to rest, I think, is that there was a lack of water which would have serviced this canal system. I know when I was growing up, I heard that the lack of water was a fatal flaw, something that wasn't taken into consideration. I remember back in 2016, as we walked, one of the engineers pointed to one of the locks and commented that the town had just put up fences along the canal and had filled in part of the canal with earth from the original, reducing the original 12-foot depth. I knew the area was plagued with artesian wells, having worked in the local cemeteries as a university student. The engineer pointed out that the records showed that the canal kept filling up with water back then. So in other words, for a canal that had no source of water, according to the government opposition government's complaints, a 12-foot deep canal was filling up by itself from underground water from artesian wells. Interesting. The engineer pointed out that the record showed that the canal kept filling up with water, and that it was when it was being built, and it was filling up from underground water sources. When the canal was abandoned, it was necessary to fill in the canal with soil and put up fencing because the canal continued to be fed by underground water sources. The story of a lack of water to fill the canal system would seem to be just another of those myths associated with this remarkable project. And the re-examination goes on by our universities and those who are not too sure of the facts associated with the Ghost Canal that they have looked at in our history books. One of the reasons why I was interested in looking at this particular event for our series was the fact that I would suggest that many of the events in our local history should be re-examined using expertise available to us now that perhaps wasn't available to them then. Also, we have the ability through the Freedom of Information Act to go back and look at the documentation and perhaps, and I say just perhaps, reevaluate what really happened as opposed to what we were told was happening. Again, I find it absolutely incredible that a project was canceled by a government that never arrived on site to check out whether what they were saying was true. We were in a situation across this country where it wasn't possible for people to visit a site to take a look at the truth of what they were being told. I think it's absolutely incredible that they canceled a project and essentially wrote off $600,000. For those people who are interested, $600,000 in the currency of 1912 would probably be, probably 4 or 5, maybe even more $1 million today. But they just walked away from it, which I find absolutely incredible. And I give full credit to those engineers that I walked with back in 2016. They very kindly sent me a copy of their report, which indicated that not only was this project doable, but probably was even more of a slam dunk than the Trent Canal system. It was straight. The water existed. The progress was being made. As I say, it was nearly complete. And probably, we should be looking back at that and learn a lesson, which is that when we're told that something is true by our authorities, we should take a second look. Because quite often, a lot of decisions, as we look at our local history and our Canadian history, a lot of decisions were made for political reasons and not really for economic or efficiency reasons. I hope you've enjoyed our look at the Ghost Canal. I hope you'll come back and visit us next time for another edition of Did You Know? For now, this is Rick McLeod, the History Hound, wishing you well. See you next time.